Peace be upon you, dear friends. Today I will tell you the story of Ömer, the poor woodcutter, who, despite his own hunger, embraced a mute child freezing to death under the snow. You will not be able to hold back your tears as you listen to this story, which proves that compassion is more valuable than chests full of gold. On the slope of that desolate hill, where the pine forests at the edge of the town stretched like spears to the sky, there was an old hut forgotten by time. This strange dwelling, where the wind gnawed at its planks and snow melt never ceased from its roof in winter, was the refuge of Ömer the Woodcutter. Ömer was a man whose burden was heavier than mountains, but whose faith was wider than the world. His hands were calloused, his face was weathered by the wind, and his gaze was under the shadow of deep sorrow. Years ago, in the prime of his youth, he had lost his beloved wife, and then his unborn child to the relentless plague that ravaged the town. From that day on, he closed his door to worldly desires, buried his pain in his heart, and found solace in seeking refuge in his Lord. It was the depths of winter. This year, winter had struck harder and more mercilessly than ever before. The sky seemed to cover the town like a gray blanket, and the sun had not shown its face. The cold took one's breath away, penetrating to the very bones. As he did every morning, Ömer performed his morning prayers before dawn and set off. He slung his rusty axe, his only possession, over his shoulder. He tightened the rope tied around his waist and plunged into the depths of the forest to seek his livelihood. That day, the forest was quieter and more eerie than usual. The trees groaned under the heavy weight of the snow, and the branches cracked. Ömer worked tirelessly until evening. He gathered dried branches and broke up fallen logs. The sweat dripping from his forehead evaporated in the cold air, freezing his beard. He kept saying, quote, 0 to himself. Quote 1. As the evening call to prayer approached, he began his journey back, carrying the bundle of firewood on his back. But a blizzard suddenly struck. Visibility was 0, and the wind howled as if it were shaking the mountains. Ömer, with difficulty, made his way towards the ancient plane tree at the edge of the forest. That plane tree had stood there for hundreds of years, witnessing countless winters and storms. Just as he reached the tree, a strange, thin sound reached his ears amidst the terrible howling of the wind. He stopped. He held his breath. Was it a trick of the wind, or the whimper of a hungry wolf? The sound was heard again. It was neither the sound of the wind nor an animal. It was the last struggle of a dying soul. Ömer dropped the heavy load on the snow. He walked, trudging through the snow, towards the direction from which the sound came, behind the massive trunk of the great plane tree. His knees buckled at the sight before him. He collapsed where he stood. A child, huddled in the hollow of the tree, wearing nothing but a thin, tattered cardigan, was there, hunched over from the cold, tiny and small. He was 5, maybe 6 years old. His face was purple from the cold. His eyelashes frozen. His eyes were half open, half closed. He was teetering on that thin line between life and death. A burning fire fell into Ömer's heart. It was as if he had seen his own child, whom he had buried years ago. Without hesitation, he took off his thick woolen cloak. With trembling hands, he wrapped it around the child's ice-cold body. When he took him in his arms, he realized how light the child was. He was nothing but skin and bones. Ömer whispered, his voice trembling. Quote 3. At that moment, his own poverty, the lack of a single loaf of bread in his house, the dwindling firewood, didn't even cross his mind. Compassion was above all calculations. He held the child close to his heart. He bravely ran toward his hut, defying the blizzard, trying to warm the child with his own body heat. He sank into the snow, fell, got up again, but never let go of the child in his arms. When he opened the creaking door of his hut and entered, the inside was much better than the outside. He immediately threw the last of the dry wood he had into the stove. He stoked the fire. He laid the child on his old but clean bed. He rubbed the child's ice-cold hands and feet with his own hands. As the child began to warm up, his trembling increased. His teeth chattered. Ömer mixed a handful of tarhana, a type of dried soup mix, that he had hidden in the corner of the cupboard with water, and quickly boiled a soup. With a wooden spoon, he fed the soup drop by drop to the child's bruised lips. Hours later, the inside of the hut had warmed up, and the sound of the storm outside had subsided somewhat. The child opened his eyes completely. He had large, coal-black eyes, but a deep fear and emptiness dominated those eyes. Ömer asked in a compassionate voice, "What is your name, son? Do you have no one? Where did you come from in this snow and cold?" The child stared blankly at Ömer's face. His lips moved, but not a single word, not a sound came out. He just looked. It was as if he didn't know how to speak, or the horror he had experienced had sealed his tongue. Ömer asked again, in a softer voice, "Don't be afraid of me, son." Quote 5. 2 tears streamed down the child's cheeks, but he still didn't answer. Ömer understood that the child's silence wasn't from the cold, but from a deep wound in his heart. Quote 6. He wondered. Then he composed himself. He stroked the child's head. "It's all right," he said. "It's okay if you don't speak. God knows your situation. You are my guest tonight. May tomorrow bring good fortune." That night Omer didn't sleep. In the flickering light of the gas lamp, he looked at the stranger child sleeping soundly in bed, occasionally startled by nightmares. He had an indescribable feeling inside. The hut, which had been empty and echoing for years, seemed to have suddenly filled and become lively, but at the same time there were anxieties gnawing at his mind. Quote, 9, he thought. Quote, 10. Quote, 11. The devil whispered, approaching Omar's ear. "Leave him, take him to the town square tomorrow. Leave him in the mosque courtyard. What business do you have feeding someone else's child? You can't even provide for yourself." But Omar turned to his prayer mat at that moment. When he placed his forehead on the ground in prostration, those clouds of doubt in his heart dispersed. "O Lord," he pleaded, tears streaming down his face, "this innocent child is a test from you, a trust. You are the provider of sustenance. You who do not leave even an ant without sustenance, will you leave this companion hungry? I have decided to take care of him. Give me strength. Do not let me be disgraced." When the first rays of morning light filtered through the window, Omar had made his decision. No matter the cost, he would not leave this child in the hands of those merciless people in that den of wolves. However, he did not know that this decision was only the beginning of a series of events that would fundamentally change his life. Outside, the town's gossip cauldron was about to boil, and the trials awaiting Omer would be far more scorching than the cold of that winter. The next morning, when the sun shone through the ice-covered windows, the hut seemed to have shed some of the heavy gloom of the previous day. Omer, as was his habit for years, woke up before dawn and performed his morning prayers. Turning to look at the bed, he saw the child awake. The little boy had pulled the blanket up to his chin. He was simply watching Omer, with his dark, timid eyes. There was no longer any fear in his gaze. Rather, there was the calmness of a ship that had found refuge in a safe harbor. Omer smiled. Quote 15, he said affectionately. Quote 16. The child didn't say a word. He nodded gently. Omer took an old woolen sock from the chest and put it on the child's feet. He also gave him his own tattered coat. The child was almost lost inside the coat, but at least he was warm. Omer, wearing only a thin vest, deluded himself into thinking, quote 17, but the biting cold outside was enough to freeze your breath. The two walked toward the town through knee-deep snow. Omer was in front, the child following behind with tiny steps. After a while, the child grew tired and stumbled, and Omer, without hesitation, lifted him onto his back. The scene was that of an old, bent-over man carrying an unknown child on his back. As they crossed the stone bridge at the entrance to the town, the usual flow of life seemed to have stopped. The market was set up, but the cold had dampened spirits. As Omer walked through the mid-middle of the market with the child on his back, all eyes turned to him like arrows. Whispers began. Who is this child? Who has Omer found again? He's hungry himself, and now he has to feed someone else? Omer ignored the whispers. He went straight to the busiest spot in town in front of the coffee house. He asked everyone, hoping someone might know or recognize the child. "Gentlemen, I found this child yesterday in the forest, freezing to death in the hollow of a plane tree. Does anyone know him, or has anyone seen him? Whose child is he?" The crowd in the coffee house fell silent. Everyone looked at the child, but no one showed any familiarity. Just then the crowd parted, and Jamal Ah, the town's richest timber merchant, appeared, his rosary in hand and a sable fur coat on his back. Jamal Ah was a man spoiled by money, who had traded compassion for arrogance. He looked at Omer and the wretched child on his back with disgust. Quote 18. Gur said, mockingly. Quote 19. Omer's face flushed, but he held his head high. "God forbid," he said. "I have never asked anyone for money before. I am only looking for this child's family. Perhaps someone will know him." Jamal Ah burst into laughter. Those around him also laughed, trying to appease him. Who knows whose illegitimate child he is? Or is he an ill omen, abandoned by some gypsy? Look at him, he looks like a beggar. You say you found him in the forest. Clearly he's a mute, possessed by jinns and fairies. Leave him, Omer. Take him to an orphanage. Don't bring trouble upon us. He'll bring bad luck to this town. These words pierced Omer's heart like a dagger. The child's tiny hands clung even tighter to Omer's neck in fear. Omer felt that fear. He noticed the child's trembling body. He turned to Jamal A. His voice trembled, but his gaze was as hard as steel. "Ah, your wealth and possessions have blinded you. This child is a trust from God. This companion you call ill-omened might be—" Omer turned his back and quickly walked away. He didn't even hear the curses and mockery hurled at him. Hassan Effendi, the baker at the corner of the market, stopped Omer. Hassan was a kind but poor man. He offered Omer a warm loaf of bread. "Take it, Omer Abi," he whispered. "Don't mind Jamal A. God is great. You can feed it to the child." Ömer took the bread with tears in his eyes. He prayed for Hassan and left the town. The silence was heavier on the way back. The child's face had fallen. Even with his small heart, he understood that he was unwanted, that he was despised. When they arrived at the hut, Ömer sat the child down opposite him. He broke the warm bread that Hassan Effendi had given him. He offered the larger piece to the child. Ömer said. Then he took a deep breath. You must have a name. Since you are alone in this world, since you are a stranger, let your name be underscore, quote underscore 27 underscore, meaning underscore, quote underscore 28 underscore, or underscore, quote underscore 29 underscore. Remember, God is the protector of the strangers. The child smiled when he heard the name, quote 30, quote. It was the first time he had smiled. That smile melted all the ice in Ömer's heart. At that moment, a bond stronger than blood was formed between them. Days chased weeks, weeks chased months. Winter reigned with all its might. Every morning, Ömer took Garip with him to the forest. Although Garip couldn't speak, he had become Ömer's hands and feet. Ömer would strike with the axe, and Garip, with his small arms, would gather and bundle the branches. A language that didn't require words had developed between them. Garip understood what to do from a single glance from Ömer, from a sigh. From Garip, Ömer sensed that he was hungry or cold. But love doesn't fill stomachs. The townspeople, instigated by Seymal Ağa, had stopped buying firewood from Ömer. They called him the father of the unlucky one. Business stopped. The flour at home was gone. The tarhana, a type of soup mix, was finished. There wasn't a single bite left to eat in the hut. Hunger was a worse enemy than the cold. One night, as a storm threatened to tear the hut from its foundations, Garip couldn't sleep from hunger, silently writhing in pain, clutching his stomach. Ömer couldn't bear this sight. He got up and boiled some water. He threw in a few dried herbs he'd found in the garden. I made soup, son, he said, giving Garip that tasteless hot water to drink. His own stomach was rumbling with hunger, his head was spinning, but he didn't take a single sip. Quote, 3-3, he said, lying. Quote, 3-4. Garip looked at Ömer's bowl, then into Ömer's eyes. That little boy knew Ömer was hungry. He pushed the bowl away and offered it to Ömer. This gesture made Ömer burst into tears. That night, with empty stomachs but loving hearts, they hugged each other and cried. When Ömer woke up the next morning, he felt a strange determination within him. In his eyes, the last glimmer of courage born of desperation flickered. Clearly, things couldn't go on like this. They would either die of hunger or a miracle would happen. He picked up his axe. He looked at the stranger. Get dressed, stranger, he said. Today we're going to the Black Valley, the deepest part of the forest, a place no one dares to go. There are ancient trees there. Perhaps God will open a door for us. Ömer didn't know it, but that day they were walking not only into the depths of the forest, but towards a turning point in their destiny. The Black Valley would either be their grave or their salvation. The Black Valley was an eerie place, a place the townspeople feared even mentioning, a place where even the sun was afraid to enter, where the majestic trees intertwined to obscure the sky. According to legends, it was a secluded corner where ancient bandits hid and wolves made their dens, but Ömer had no fear left. Hunger had consumed his fear. Ömer led the way, the little stranger behind him pushing through the snow that reached their knees into the valley. The wind here didn't just howl, it screamed. Ömer was breathless and exhausted from hunger. But he tried to walk upright so as not to show his distress. He stopped in front of an ancient oak tree half burned by a lightning strike, but its trunk still stood like a massive column. This is the strange one, he said breathlessly. The wood of this tree burns for months. It will get us through the winter, and if I sell the leftovers, I'll make you a hot soup. Maybe we'll buy some new shoes, too. Ömer said a prayer, spat into his palms, and grasped his axe. Oh God, he exclaimed, Oroes, and struck the first blow. A dull thud came from the dry tree. But Ömer's arms were so weak that the axe bounced instead of sticking into the tree. Still, he didn't stop. With each blow, he said, Allah. With each blow, he gathered strength, thinking of the innocent face of the poor boy. The poor boy, meanwhile, was huddled in a corner, making snowballs with his small hands, watching his father and occasionally running to collect the splinters that fell. Hours passed. Ömer's hands were cracked and bleeding. His sweat had cooled and turned to ice on his back. Just as he said, quote, 42 cracking sounds began to rise from the tree. The huge trunk shook. It shook and fell with a great crash, shaking the earth and sky. Snow dust rose into the air. But when the tree fell, something strange happened. A metallic object, along with the tree, rolled out of a hollow in the middle of the tree's rotten trunk and struck the stone. A deep voice echoed through the valley, calling out, Chan! Ömer recoiled. As the dust settled, he saw a rusty, moss-covered iron chest protruding from among the shattered logs. The chest's lid was ajar from the force of the fall. Ömer approached with curiosity. Garip, frightened, clung to his leg. When Ömer fully opened the chest, the sight before him made him collapse to the ground. His eyes were dazzled. His breath caught in his throat. The chest. It was overflowing with gold coins, ruby necklaces, and emeralds. This treasure was enough to feed an army, to buy a town. Clearly, centuries ago, a band of bandits or someone fleeing from war had hidden it in the hollow of that tree and never returned. Ömer's heart pounded. He reached in, touching the cold gold. It was real. It wasn't a dream. At that moment, the devil landed on Ömer's right shoulder and began to whisper, "Take these, Ömer, take them and leave. Those townspeople who look down on you, who don't greet you, you can buy them all off. You can stand before Tsemal Aya and throw these gold coins in his face. You can make the poor man live in palaces. No one will know. Only this tree, this valley, will be your witness. God sent this to you. It is your right." Ömer paused for a moment. Images of rich feasts, warm mansions, and the poor man strolling in silks flashed before his eyes. The rumbling in his stomach made these dreams even sweeter. He plunged his hand into a handful of gold, gripping it tightly. Then he looked at the poor man. The child wasn't mesmerized by the gleam of the gold, but looked at his father's face with anxiety. Ömer saw his own conscience in those innocent eyes. The words he had learned from his father, heard from his teacher, echoed in his mind. Quote 45. Ömer quickly put the gold coins back into the chest as if he had touched fire. He shook himself. He recited the Uzu, Besmillah, and chased away the devil. He shouted quote 46 into the empty valley, quote 47 . He closed the lid of the chest. He took off his shirt and wrapped the chest in it. He himself didn't understand how he managed to lift that heavy chest onto his shoulders, trembling with hunger. That strength was the strength of faith. He took the poor man's hand. He said, "Tell the esteemed judge that there is an important matter concerning the treasury, sir. I cut down a dry tree in the forest. This came out of it. Satan tempted me greatly, but my Lord did not allow me to take what is forbidden. The owner of this property is unknown. However, it is not mine either. I have come to hand it over to you." Quote 51. "What's your name, brave man?" he asked. "Ömer, sir. Ömer the Woodcutter." The judge placed his hand on Ömer's shoulder. "Ömer Effendi, are there still people like you in this day and age? You could have taken all this gold and fled from place to place. No one would have known. But you feared God." The judge immediately ordered his clerks to open the law books. According to Islamic law, 1/5 of the treasure found in ownerless land belongs to the state, and the rest is permissible for the finder, the judge said in a loud voice. Ömer was surprised. "What do you mean, sir? Did I deserve this?" "You deserve the best, Ömer, said the judge, counting the gold in the chest. He set aside a large portion and placed it in a purse which Ömer accepted. Even this purse was a fortune greater than anything Ömer had ever seen in his life. "This is your rightful due. It is as pure as your mother's milk. Take it. Make yourself and this orphan prosperous." Ömer took the purse trembling. He knelt down. He opened his hands and prostrated himself in gratitude. The orphan also knelt beside him, imitating his father, and prostrated himself. Everyone in the room, even the serious guards, wept at this sight. When Ömer left the mansion, he was no longer the poorest man in town, but perhaps the richest in heart. But he wasn't thinking about the money. His first act was to run to the bakery. He took 5 loaves of warm bread. He immediately broke one into pieces. He gave half to the poor man and ate the other half himself. That dry bread seemed like the most delicious feast in the world to them. But the real miracle was yet to come. Ömer was going to use the money he had to alleviate the poor man's suffering, and fate was weaving its web for happiness this time. Ömer wasn't surprised by what he would do with the considerable fortune he had acquired, because his compass was his conscience, and that compass never went astray. First, he had the makeshift hut, exposed to the wind, repaired. He added 2 more rooms, but he never turned it into a palace. "Our palace is our heart," he said. Then he went around to the poor, the orphans, and the widows of the town. He repaired some roofs, paid off some grocery debts, and stockpiled winter provisions for others. But he did it all secretly, in the darkness of night, so that no one would feel indebted. Let not your left hand know what your right hand gives. Ömer's real investment, however, was in the poor man. He brought the city's most renowned physicians. The physicians examined the child. They checked his throat and tongue. An old physician, stroking the poor boy's head, made the diagnosis. "This child's tongue isn't tied, Ömer Effendi. This child's heart is knotted. A great fear he's experiencing has locked his tongue, and the remedy is love, compassion, and patience." Ömer was patient. For days and nights he told the poor boy stories. He talked to him. He read the Quran to him. It was a spring morning. The apple trees in the garden were in bloom. The birds were chirping. Ömer wiped the sweat from his brow while hoeing in the garden. The poor boy came with a bowl of cold water in his hand. When Ömer drank the water and said, "Thank you, son, may God bless you," the poor boy's lips trembled. His eyes filled with tears, and a hoarse but clear sound came from his throat. "Father, father." Omer's hoe fell to the ground. The world seemed to stop. He knelt down. He took the poor boy by the shoulders. "What did you say?" "Say it again, my dear." Garip shouted this time in a louder, more confident voice. "Father, my father!" At that moment Omer felt 1,000 times richer than the day he found the treasure. Under the blossoming trees, the two embraced and wept for minutes. That word, father, had become the cure for all the suffering and loneliness Omer had endured for years. Time flowed by like water. Garip had grown into a handsome, well-mannered young man. Omer, too, had aged considerably, his hair and beard turning gray. The balance of power in the town had shifted. Simal Ah, the arrogant man who had once chased Omer away as a bad omen, had gone bankrupt due to his shady dealings. He was penniless. Creditors were knocking on his door, and he had put his house and belongings up for sale. When Omer heard this, he didn't hesitate. With the last of his gold coins, he secretly paid off Kemal Ah's debts. When Kemal Ah learned that his debt was paid off and that it was Omer who had done it, he was so ashamed he wanted to sink into the ground. He came to Omer's door and fell at his feet, saying, "Forgive me, Omer Effendi, I wronged you. You gave me life." Omer lifted him up. "Get up, Hayv," he said. "It is not fitting for us to strike the fallen. We are commanded to lift up the fallen." However, the last and greatest test that fate had prepared for Omer and Garip had not yet been experienced. One Friday, ornate horsemen entered the town square in a cloud of dust. At the head was a majestic Ottoman pasha wearing embroidered robes. The pasha, with his soldiers, went straight to the village coffee-house. In his hand was a yellowed piece of paper and an old picture of a child. "Ah, his plight!" roared the pasha. "Years ago I lost my nephew Selim, who had a speech impediment, in a bandit raid in these forests. I'm searching for him now. He's in this town." Everyone held their breath. All eyes turned to Omer and the stranger who had come out of the mosque. When the pasha saw the stranger, he practically flew off his horse. Tears streamed from his eyes. "Selim," he shouted, "my brother's legacy. His eyes are just like his face is like mine. His gaze, I swear, is his. My son, old man." Quote 72. "I heard that you raised my nephew. May God be pleased with you. Ask me whatever you wish, and I will shower you with gold. I will give you mansions. But now I will take my nephew to Istanbul to receive his share of the throne. There he will live in palaces befitting his lineage, receive the best education in madrasas, and become a pasha." Omer's legs buckled, but he held himself upright. With a lump in his throat, he looked at the stranger. "The decision is his, pasha," he said, his voice trembling. "I acted as his father, but his origin is from you. The blood is yours. I cannot force him to stay. If he wants to go, may his path be blessed." There was complete silence in the square. Everyone held their breath. Waiting for the stranger's answer, the pasha extended his hand to the stranger. Quote, 75, he said. Quote, 76, quote, 77. Garip first looked at the ornate, ringed hand the pasha extended. Then he turned and looked at Omer's calloused, cracked, trembling hands. Those hands that had saved him from freezing. Those hands that had given him soup. Garip took a step toward the pasha. He thought everyone was leaving. He kissed the pasha's hand and placed it on his forehead. Quote 78, he said gently. Quote 79. Then he pulled back. He quickly turned and hugged Omer around the neck. He rested his head on the old man's chest. Garip continued. His voice echoed in the square. "You weren't there when I froze to death in the snow. You weren't there when I was starving. This man went hungry himself. He fed me. He didn't just give me bread. He gave me a heart. My father, my mother, my palace, my wealth are all these calloused hands. I wouldn't trade the palaces of Istanbul for my father's hut." Omer sobbed. He drowned. He smelled Garip's hair. The pasha was stunned by this loyalty. He wiped away his tears. Quote, 81 said the pasha. Quote, 82. The pasha didn't pressure Garip. On the contrary, he had a large mosque and madrasa built in that town. He covered all the expenses. He also appointed Garip as the trustee of that foundation. Years passed. One autumn evening, Omer breathed his last peacefully in Garip's lap. On his face was the smile of a man who had successfully passed his worldly test. His funeral was so crowded that the town couldn't accommodate everyone. As Garip buried his father with his own hands, he had the following inscription carved on the tombstone: "Here lies the richest man in the world, because he won the heart of an orphan." My dear brothers and sisters, the lesson we should learn from our story is this. Sustenance is not just money. Sometimes sustenance is a good child. Sometimes sustenance is a prayer offered in difficult times. Allah shows mercy to those who show mercy. Show mercy to those on earth, and those in heaven will show mercy to you. Remember, goodness never goes to waste. It always comes back.